Katara and Sokka, two siblings, are out fishing in a small canoe. While Sokka gets ready to spear a fish, Katara successfully traps one using her waterbending, forming a bubble of water above the boat. Unaware of her catch, Sokka swings his spear and accidentally bursts the bubble, sending the fish back into the sea and soaking himself. Frustrated, he scolds Katara, blaming her and her magic water for getting him wet. Katara corrects him, saying it's called waterbending, but before she can explain further, Sokka cuts her off, saying that if he had strange abilities, he'd keep them to himself. They begin to argue, but their fight is interrupted when the ocean currents suddenly grow stronger. As Sokka tries to navigate past chunks of ice and Katara shouts directions, their canoe becomes trapped and crushed between several ice floes, leaving them stuck in the icy sea. After regaining their composure, Katara furiously blames Sokka for ignoring her instruction to go left. But Sokka fires back, saying she could have just used her waterbending to steer them if she didn't like how he handled things. He finishes with a jab that it's just like a girl to mess things up. This remark pushes Katara over the edge. She explodes at him, calling him sexist, immature, and nut-brained. As she vents about all the chores she does for him, her frustration accidentally triggers a surge of waterbending power that cracks a massive iceberg nearby. The iceberg collapses into the ocean, and in the aftermath, another glowing iceberg with two shadowy figures inside surfaces. Katara, realizing one of the figures might be alive, grabs Sokka's club and heads straight for it, ignoring his warnings. As she reaches the iceberg, she starts striking it repeatedly until a sudden burst of air knocks her backward. Both she and Sokka watch in awe as the ice splits apart and a bright beam of light shoots into the sky from the broken glacier. Prince Zuko, a Fire Nation teenager who has been hunting the Avatar for 2 years, sees the bright light from his ship. His uncle, Iroh, who has accompanied the young prince on his journey, dismisses the event as completely natural. Zuko orders his crew to head toward the light, insisting that the light was emitted by the Avatar. After Katara breaks through the iceberg, she discovers a young boy inside with unusual arrow-shaped markings on his head and hands. Now, Sokka, unsettled by the strange turn of events, immediately aims his spear at the boy. However, the boy collapses into Katara's arms, and she gently lays him down to tend to him. Still suspicious, Sokka prods the boy's forehead with the dull end of his spear, but Katara, irritated, pushes him aside. The boy slowly opens his eyes, gazing up at Katara's face and her striking blue eyes. Suddenly, he brightens and cheerfully asks if she wants to go penguin sledding, catching her off guard. She hesitantly agrees. The boy stands up quickly, surprising Sokka, who instantly goes on the defensive. When the boy, confused by Sokka's reaction, asks what's going on, Sokka demands an explanation for how he ended up trapped in the ice. The boy simply replies that he doesn't know, calmly nudging the spear pointed at his face out of the way. Hearing a low growl coming from inside the hollow iceberg, the boy climbs back over its edge and finds a large furry creature with 6 legs lying still. After a brief moment, he excitedly manages to wake it up. When Sokka skeptically asks what the creature is, the boy explains that it's Appa, his flying bison. Sokka, doubtful that such a bulky animal could fly, voices his disbelief just before Appa sneezes on him, drenching him in bison snot. Disgusted, Sokka frantically tries to wipe the goo off in the snow, while the boy casually reassures him that it comes out easily. Looking around, the boy then asks if they live nearby. Sokka, still wary, tells Katara not to answer, claiming the boy must be a Fire Nation spy, an accusation Katara scoffs at. She introduces herself and asks for the boy's name. As he begins to reply, he sneezes and is launched high into the air. Gently landing back on the ground, he rubs his nose and cheerfully says his name is Aang. Katara, amazed at how high he flew from a sneeze, guesses that he must be an airbender, which Aang confirms with a smile. Sokka, feeling overwhelmed by the bizarre events, declares that he's done and plans to go home, only to realize, after taking a few steps, that they're still stranded on an iceberg in the middle of the ocean. Seeing their predicament, Aang offers to fly them back to Wolf Cove. Katara eagerly agrees, while Sokka initially refuses, but quickly changes his mind when he remembers they have no other options. The group climbs onto Appa's saddle, with Sokka still grumbling in disbelief that the bison can actually fly. Aang gives the command, "Yip, yip," and Appa leaps into the air, only to splash down into the sea and start swimming instead. As Sokka mocks Appa's supposed flying abilities, Aang admits the bison might still be too tired to fly. He then turns to Katara with a wide grin, silently staring at her until she awkwardly asks why he's smiling like that. "Oh, I was smiling," he replies innocently. Sokka groans loudly, while Katara, though initially amused, frowns at her brother's dramatic reaction. Meanwhile, on the deck of a ship, Zuko stands alone, gazing out at the sea. His uncle Iroh tries to convince him to rest, warning that even if they find the Avatar, history suggests they will fail, just like Zuko's ancestors. But Zuko is determined. He insists that he will succeed because he is different. He is chasing the Avatar to reclaim his honor, a purpose his ancestors never had. Back on the water, Katara, curious, asks Aang if he knows what happened to the Avatar. Since he's an airbender, she assumes he might have some knowledge. Aang, caught off guard, hesitantly says he knew people who knew the Avatar, but not the Avatar himself. Disappointed, Katara lets the topic drop, leaving Aang quietly looking down, guilt written across his face. Falling asleep on Appa's back, Aang has a dream in which he recalls his last moments before being encased in the ice. In it, he and Appa fly through a terrible storm near the South Pole. He remembers the both of them being buffeted by the full fury of the gale, struggling vainly to escape, and eventually being forced under the waves. As Aang began to lose consciousness, however, his eyes and tattoos began to glow, and he created a bubble around himself and Appa, which he froze solid. As the ice thickened, Aang is abruptly jolted awake by Katara, finding himself in a tent in the Wolf Cove. Katara is eager to introduce him to the rest of the village, and Aang dresses quickly with Katara watching. She notices with surprise the arrow markings running along his body and gasps. She does not say anything, however, and as soon as Aang is completely dressed, she pulls him along and introduces him to the entire population, which is composed of a small number of women and children. Sokka watches from a short distance away. Aang bows to the villagers respectfully, accidentally eliciting a response of fear from them, and they hurriedly take a few steps away from the airbender, to the unhappy surprise of Aang and Katara. Aang asks Katara in a hushed voice why they are looking at him this way and wonders if Appa, unnoticed by him, has sneezed on him. As he checks his clothes for bison snot, an elderly woman steps forward and addresses him, explaining that, owing to the 100-year absence of airbenders from the world, they believe them to be extinct. The use of this specific word does not escape Aang, who repeats the word in disbelief before Katara introduces the woman as her grandmother. She herself insists on being called Gran. Abruptly interrupting the conversation, Sokka redoubles his interrogation of Aang, snatching his staff and examining it closely. Viewing it through the lens of war, he assumes it is a weapon and somewhat derisively deems it a failure, having blunt ends which are incapable of stabbing. Aang swiftly reclaims his staff from Sokka with a small gust of air bending and calmly tells him it's not meant for stabbing. It's for air bending. He then snaps open the wings of the staff, causing Sokka to recoil in alarm. A nearby child, clearly delighted, asks him to do the magic trick again. Aang gently corrects her, saying, "It's not magic, it's air bending." Spinning the staff gracefully, he explains that by manipulating air currents around the glider, he can use it to fly. Sokka scoffs. "Last time I checked, humans can't fly." Aang replies with quiet confidence, "Check again," and takes off, stirring up a gust of wind as the villagers shield their faces. He soars in wide circles overhead, earning gasps and cheers from the crowd. Buoyed by the attention, Aang closes his eyes mid-flight, but crashes directly into a nearby snow and ice watchtower, sending it tumbling down. Katara and the children rush to help Aang, while Sokka scrambles to salvage the ruined tower. Snow buries him, and frustrated, he mutters that both Aang and Katara are just wasting time with bending before walking off in irritation. Still excited, Aang asks Katara if she's really a waterbender. She admits she's only sort of one, before Gran calls her away for chores. Out of Aang's hearing, Katara excitedly tells her grandmother that she might have finally found someone who can teach her. Gran, wary, advises her not to trust too quickly in someone she barely knows. Katara dismisses the concern and, with hopeful conviction, says Aang seems filled with much wisdom. Just then, they both glance over at Aang, who's busy entertaining a group of toddlers by sticking his tongue to his glider staff, leaving Katara smiling and Gran unconvinced. Meanwhile, on the Fire Nation ship, Prince Zuko practices his firebending techniques with Iroh as the instructor by sparring against two soldiers. After a quick firebending exchange between them, Iroh stands up with a sigh and stops the fight, somewhat impatiently correcting a mistake which Zuko has made. Becoming impatient, Zuko wheels on his uncle, demanding to be taught the next, more advanced set of moves, though Iroh merely brushes his demand off, stating that Zuko must first master the most simple and basic moves. Flying into a rage at Iroh's words, Zuko attacks one of the soldiers with a blast of fire, knocking him off his feet, before once again rounding on Iroh. He repeats his demand, reasoning that the Avatar had 100 years to master the elements and could thus not be beaten with basic firebending. Mulling his nephew's words over for a few seconds, Iroh concedes, though only on the condition that he be allowed to finish eating his meal of roast duck, which he placidly proceeds to do in front of a dismayed Zuko. Sokka sternly addresses the 6 young boys of the tribe, trying to instill in them a sense of discipline by reminding them they are the tribe's warriors. His serious tone is quickly undercut when one of the boys shyly raises his hand to say he needs to pee. After trying to hold on to the moment, Sokka reluctantly asks how many others feel the same, and all of them raise their hands. As the kids rush off, Sokka groans in frustration, covering his face with his hand. Just then, Katara walks up, asking if he's seen Aang. Coincidentally, Aang is emerging from the outhouse at that moment and, noticing the boys heading his way, cheerfully announces, "Wow, everything freezes in there." The boys burst into laughter, while Sokka scowls and orders Aang to leave, insisting this is a training session for warriors only. But to Sokka's horror, he hears even more laughter and finds that Aang has led the boys in a game atop Appa. They've rigged the bison's tail like a slide and are taking turns launching themselves off of it, using Sokka's own spear as a measuring stick. Storming over, Sokka scolds them and accuses Aang of ruining the lesson with distractions, reminding everyone that they're in the middle of a war. At that moment, Aang hops down from Appa and, to their surprise, says he has no idea what war Sokka is talking about. Sokka, dumbfounded, demands to know if he's joking, but before Aang can explain, an otter penguin appears nearby. Instantly captivated, Aang dashes off after it with a gust of air, leaving Sokka and Katara in stunned silence. Sokka turns to her and repeats his question, "Is he serious?" But Katara has no answer, and the two exchange confused glances. Sometime later, Katara tracks Aang to an icy waste populated by a flock of otter penguins. The Airbender is in the process of trying to catch one, but the creatures are proving to be too fast and slippery for him. Katara approaches and agrees to teach him how to catch one, on the condition that Aang teach her waterbending. While he likes the idea, Aang points out reluctantly that he knows nothing about waterbending, being an airbender, and he asks if there are any other waterbenders from whom she could learn. Katara responds despondently that she is the only waterbender in the whole of the South Pole. Aang is struck by the injustice of the situation and suggests the Northern Water Tribe as an option, certain that the other tribe should have waterbenders to teach Katara. Excited by the thought of finding a waterbending master for Katara, he offers to fly her to the North Pole himself. Katara, however, expresses uncertainty at the thought of leaving her tribe, and Aang suggests that she consider the matter later, teaching him to catch penguins in the meantime. She gives Aang a pensive speech about the method of catching penguins being an ancient and secret art, before simply pulling a fish from her sleeve and tossing it to Aang, who laughs as he is mobbed by otter penguins. Aang and Katara go penguin sledding, racing joyfully across the snow and ice. Their ride takes them through rugged terrain, culminating in a thrilling descent into an ice tunnel. When they emerge on the other side, they find themselves on a vast icy plain where a massive rusted ship looms in the distance, an old Fire Navy ship raised above the ground by jagged ice. Curious, Aang asks about the wreck, and Katara explains that it's a relic from the Fire Nation's first attack on the Southern Water Tribe. Though visibly uneasy, Katara hesitates when Aang suggests exploring it. Encouraging her with the words, "Being a bender is about letting go of fear," Aang convinces her, and they venture toward the ship together. Inside, the ship is cold and silent, filled with the echoes of long-forgotten battles. As they explore, Katara reveals that the vessel is as old as her grandmother and part of the tribe's dark history. In a room lined with old weaponry, Aang tells her he had friends all over the world, including in the Fire Nation, and insists he never saw any war. When Katara asks how long he was trapped in the iceberg, Aang, confused, guesses it's only been a few days. But Katara, stunned, gently tells him it's likely been 100 years, based on his complete ignorance of the war that has consumed the world. The weight of this truth hits Aang hard, and he collapses to the floor in despair. Trying to cheer him up, Katara says there might still be a bright side, and Aang, lifting his head with a small smile, says, "Well, I did get to meet you." He takes her hand, and they continue exploring together. As Aang walks ahead into another room, he unknowingly triggers a tripwire. Suddenly, metal bars slam down, trapping them inside while a flare is fired high into the sky, an ancient alarm system still functional after all this time. Realizing they're in danger, Aang looks up, spots a hole in the ceiling, and quickly lifts Katara into his arms. With a powerful burst of airbending, he blasts them both upward through the opening, narrowly escaping the trap. Unbeknownst to them, the flare's signal has been seen, alerting someone watching the skies. From the deck of his ship, Prince Zuko, having seen the flare, watches through a spyglass as two small figures jump down the side of the ship. Realizing he has found the last Airbender, he comments that the bender is quite agile for his old age and yells to a soldier standing behind him to wake his uncle and tell him that he has found the Avatar. Looking through the spyglass again, he tracks the two figures and, scouting ahead in the direction they are running toward, his eye lands upon the tiny village in the distance. As he lowers the spyglass, squinting into the distance, Zuko adds quietly that he has also found the Avatar's hiding place.